One of the coolest programs we ever worked on many, many years ago, we brought Dr. D. James Kennedy to Chattanooga, and we actually drove to a place, Dayton, Tennessee,
Yeah.
where the Ray County, RHEA, Ray County Courthouse was, and that's where the original Scopes trial was. And what Dr. Kennedy did, in effect, in this program we produced, and I was privileged to be co-producer of it, was we had kind of a Scopes trial in reverse, and it was called the Case for Creation. So Dr. Kennedy, in the very courtroom where the Scopes trial was, he, said, wait a minute now, we're given, the idea that evolution is true and blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, but, let's look at the facts. And it was really neat. And now that was many, many years ago, but I always remember that because we had to fly into Chattanooga and then drive to Dayton.
Hey, if that was enough years ago, then I can probably steal that idea, reproduce it now in the present, and do that because I love that. I think that's really cool. For those
That
who don't,
program, by the way, was so appreciated by some folks. Films for Christ, which is a
yeah,
ministry, I guess it was based in Arizona or something. But remember when they used to have church films? I don't know if they still do church films, but
yeah,
Films for Christ actually liked that so much they worked out a deal with the ministry to actually show that as one of their films. The Case
yeah.
for
Because wow, think about it. That trial, there's these hallmark trials in America, Brown versus Board of Education and stuff, and that's one of them. And for those who don't know, they call it the Scopes Monkey Trial, which is kind of a silly name for a way to remember it. But essentially, it's kind of one of the things we point back to for why evolution became such a foundational doctrine for teachers in high school and elementary school.
Yeah,
It
and
became the
and
yeah,
actually, the Christian side technically won the battle but lost the war, and really a lot of it was because of the PR about the trial, the public relations, particularly H.L. Mencken, who was a very strong skeptic and very clever writer, but also a skeptic. They broadcast the trial and made it look like the Christian side was foolish and dumb,
yeah,
and the evolutionary side was the wise side. And it turns out all the evidence that Clarence Darrow marshaled in favor of evolution, macroevolution, uh, turned out to be false. He didn't
yeah,
know it at the time. They didn't know it at the time. But then it's one of those kinds of things. Where, for example, he was showing this tooth, and he was saying they were implying that this tooth was part of a missing link between ancient primates and man and so forth. Then it turns out, no, it was the tooth of an ancient pig. But
yeah.
when it comes to evolution, even to this day, that court trial was, almost 100 years ago. Even to this day, the missing links are still missing.
Yeah. What's super interesting about that too is that shows, I think, almost the predicate for our conversation, but but not to be too self-aggrandizing, just a predicate for conversations. Period. Maybe the best way to kind of synthesize this is to say, I remember I'm only close to 40 now, but I remember when the left and people on the liberal Democratic side of the aisle were saying abortions for the sake of women's rights should be available and rare. That was their argument way back in the day. That was their talking point. And what my, how we have evolved to where now abortions must be on demand, and you must agree with my political standpoint on abortion being a feminist issue or a women's right issue. And you can even go further with the kind of the LGBT community and kind of how that whole issue has evolved in the talking points that are associated with those things. So I guess as a predicate for our conversation today, it's important that we have conversations. It's important that we don't just gloss over, because now we're sitting on the post side of the Scopes trial, and the reality is, as a young man in school, I did not get taught creation science one iota. The only operating principle for teachers today is if you don't teach evolution, then you don't get a job in the public school system. And maybe even Christians would disagree with this, but I would say teach both. Figure out where there's evidence for this, and where there's evidence for creation, where there's evidence for kind of macroevolution, and all those things, and where was Darwin correct and where was he wrong and all that stuff. But the reality is you're only taught one point of view, and so
Right.
we could discuss all of the nuances there. But the reality is that is a microcosm of the way society and culture evolves if we're not active in the public marketplace of ideas.
Yeah, I agree with you, and you're only hearing the one side of it, and and quite honestly, is obviously we don't want to harp on evolution or anything, but uh, zero times any number, no matter how big that number is always zero,
Yeah.
and the chances, honestly, the chances of evolution happening, macroevolution,
Right.
what they do is they'll look at organisms and they'll say, oh, look, there's tiny little changes within the organism. Okay, fine.
Right.
Everybody knew that before Darwin. But what Darwin's theory expostulates is the idea that, oh, well, these tiny little changes within organisms also, there were these gigantic leaps where one organism evolved into another organism. And there's no evidence for that in the fossil
sure.
record. There's still no evidence. As I said, the missing links are still missing. And even the chances of life happening without a creator or without, some sort of creation, in other words, just happening by chance, is no, it's zero. I mean,
Right.
like we even said in that show, if you had a hurricane go through a junkyard and then assembled a fully assembled operating 747 airplane that you could fly safely,
Yeah.
evolution happening is even greater than the odds of that creation of a 747 through the tornado. And so anyway, bottom line is, you're right, these battles are important, and it's important for Christians not to retreat. In fact, it's funny you should mention how the fallout from the Scopes trial is sort of like the widespread acceptance of evolution. David Barton of Wall Builders once said to me, we were in a discussion, why have Christians abandoned the public square?
Yeah.
Obviously, in the last couple decades, there have been a lot of active Christians, thank God, Jerry Falwell and D. James Kennedy and so forth. But he said that he thinks the Scopes trial was one of those turning points in American life where basically a lot of the church just sort of said, okay, forget it. We're not going to get involved in this. We're just going to speak within our own, Christian community or whatever to each other.
Retreat to our corner.
That's part of the reason we're in this mess we're in today.
Yeah.
You can catch brand new episodes of Indie Thinker with Reed Huberman every Monday and weekly bonus episodes to keep you thinking throughout the week. But you have to subscribe and click the bell to be notified when new episodes drop. If you enjoy this content, make sure to like this video and share it with friends.